Welcome to today's PAWSCAST.
Good morning. My name is Don Swager, Director of the Safe Office and host of the PAWSCAST here at Frostburg State University, and welcome to another episode. You know, I was thinking this morning as I was preparing for our PAWSCAST that we've had so many excellent guests and so many fantastic topics this particular semester, and today we have another special guest. We're going to be talking about exercise and fitness, and I'm so excited that Mr. John Wright, one of our very own assistant professors here at the university, is with us. And John is an alum at Frostburg State University. He graduated with his bachelor's degree in 1993. He went on to get his master's degree at Ohio University. Love those Bobcats, John, I guess, right?
Absolutely.
And he's been an assistant professor here at the university for 29 years. Man, that's hard to believe, brother.
Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, welcome to the PAWSCAST. I'm so glad that you're here.
No, thank you. I appreciate you bringing me in.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot to unpack today.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I've always appreciated about you is your passion for fitness, exercise, and conditioning. It's part of your background, both as an undergrad and a graduate and a professional here at the university. And I know that you've helped so many of our students, and not just athletes, but other students as well. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I really appreciate about you is I know in the past, I'm a coach and I've had a couple of my athletes, and you were more than willing to sit down with them and do a little bit of a screening and just to try to determine what was going on with them. And it was really beneficial, and it really meant a lot to me. And I know it meant a lot to those students in the past. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So again, we have a lot to unpack. So let's go ahead and get started.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So we have a person maybe out there, watching today. They've never worked out before, and all of a sudden they decided that, fitness was something that they, wanted to take on as being part of their life. What are some things that you can kind of recommend to them as they get started?
Boy, that's the million-dollar question. How to get started in a fitness routine. Really, I think probably the most important thing to do right from the get-go is to ask yourself the hard questions. Why are you doing this? What are you trying to get out of this? Because there are so many different directions you can go. And I don't mean to sound wishy-washy when I say that, but is your goal to improve a sport performance, for instance? Is it to lose weight? That's one of the more common things that we see. Is it to increase strength, increase bone density? Do you want to have more energy so you can play with your kids or take your dog for a walk? So, these are the hard questions you have to ask. Really, why are you doing this? Is it for a medical reason? Your doctor said, you went to your last physical and they said, you need to get in shape. You need to start exercising. So, really, I think the best thing to do is ask yourself the hard questions. What is it that I want to get out of this program? And once you ask those questions, then I think the best thing to do next is to think about it not like a fitness influencer would look at fitness, which is going to be a pretty general approach. And it may be right, might be wrong, the direction that they go, but to look at it more like a physiologist, because the adaptations that you're going to get from the training program are going to be very, very specific. In exercise science, we call that specificity of training. And what specificity of training means is your body is going to adapt specifically to the stresses that you apply to your body. So that's what fitness is. Fitness is you apply a stressor and then give your body time to adapt. And then your body will adapt to that stressor. So it works in the other direction as well. So if you don't apply stresses to your body, then your body will atrophy. You may lose muscle mass, lose bone mass. If you're sedentary, you may gain excess body weight, lose the ability to properly metabolize the nutrients that you're taking in through your diet. And that could lead to a condition that we call metabolic syndrome, which is one of the leading conditions. It's what's killing us today. 100 years ago, we were dying from infectious disease and accidents. And today, what's killing us is, it's kind of a blanket term called metabolic syndrome, which includes things like heart disease, coronary artery disease, high blood pressure, which kind of groups in with that, type 2 diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's disease. This gets grouped in with that as well. So these are all considered metabolic diseases, and since, this is what's leading to our mortality. So regardless of why you choose to begin an exercise program, looking down the long term, how is that going to affect you as you age? I think those are some of the hard questions that you have to ask. So again, how do you really get started? Start with that question. Why are you doing this? What do you really want to get out of it? And then, really, probably the best thing to do is to hire a professional, because they can then help guide you in that direction. But if that's either out of your price range or it's just something you don't really ever foresee yourself doing, is hiring a personal trainer or a fitness professional or even a nutritionist for that matter, probably the next best thing that you could do is just get up and move. Just moving, in many cases, is all you really need to do. Several years ago, the American College of Sports Medicine developed a program called Exercise Light. And what Exercise Light was, basically the ACSM, as we call the American College of Sports Medicine, was kind of throwing up their hands and like, just move. Instead of driving around for an hour in the parking lot looking for that close spot, park farther away and walk. Take the escalator, don't take the escalator, take the steps, instead of taking the elevator or the escalator. Walk your dog, go out and play with your kids. But the idea was to accumulate at least 20 to 30 minutes of physical activity on most, if not all, days of the week. And those general guidelines, they seem very general, but it adds up. There's a new idea in fitness right now, we call it fitness snacks. So instead of trying to sit down and carve away like 20, 30, 40 minutes out of your day, which I know we all have difficulty doing that. Who has 30, 40, 50 minutes in their day that they can dedicate to exercise? Instead of doing that, just take small snacks of exercise. Just get up and move. Just that act alone can make a huge difference in your cardiovascular health, as well as your psychological health, your mental well-being. The recent research on this one has actually shown that it has a significant impact on things like depression and anxiety. So I know we're going to get more into the weeds here. We're going to talk more specifics about different types of training, but in general, just move. Make the decision to move, but more importantly, decide why you want to do it, because then you can really tailor the program specifically to what you want.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I really appreciate that. And I think that, that sedentary thing, avoiding that, moving through that key word of moving is so true. I know it's true in my life, and I've seen it in the lives of others. Just a quick story, there's a woman, she's 91 years old, in our neighborhood, and we have this little trail right down the street from my home, and every single day, regardless of the weather, that woman is moving, and she's moving pretty quickly, by the way.
Fantastic.
But you know what? She is in such great shape. She's probably in better shape than most 40, 50, or 60-year-olds, so. It's spot on, exactly what you're saying, John. I appreciate that. Sure. So how often should I work out if I really want to see results?
Oh boy, another $1 million question. So in general, it all depends on what we call the FIT principle, which stands for frequency, intensity, time, and type. Frequency is how often you train, intensity is how hard, time, that's obvious, the duration of your workout, and then type is the type of exercise that you engage in. So, at the bare minimum, if you want to kind of pull back on the reins and keep yourself from losing any fitness that you've gained, you really want to look for at least one session per week.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're really not going to make any gains in that process.
Okay.
But you could, with just a single session per week, prevent loss of cardiovascular fitness, as well as loss of strength and loss of bone mass. But it all depends on the intensity of that exercise session when you actually do engage in it. If you are just doing something where you're just getting up and getting your heart rate into, say, what we call like the zone 2 cardio, which is the point where you are just getting just a little bit winded, but you're able to carry on a conversation like we are right now. That one session might not be enough. Okay. You may have to get up into what we call zone 4, which at zone 4, now you're having difficulty carrying on a conversation. You're winded, and at this point, you can't carry on a conversation. Somebody asks you a question, you're going to be like, and then you have to stop to answer the question. Okay. At that point, at that zone 4 to zone 5 cardio, where you're full on anaerobic, at that way, your legs are going to start burning, you're definitely going to be winded. One session per week would suffice. But if you're going to keep it at a lower intensity, you could get, what you'd really need to do is, going back to those exercise snacks, every day. Do something every day, and that's really going to help move you towards getting into just a better physical condition, and you're going to also in better mental condition as well. You're going to feel a lot better. Again, getting into the weeds a little bit, what we know about the brain's adaptation to exercise. We know that there's chemicals like serotonin and dopamine, which are directly associated with mood, but also something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is directly associated with learning, but also with depression and anxiety. So our neurons, through a process called neuroplasticity, they wire together. The saying is, neurons that fire together wire together. So we can learn to be depressed. We can learn to be anxious, but we can also unlearn that as well. But again, it's going to take time. And the process is through the release of these particular chemicals. Like one of them is cortisol. Cortisol gets a bad rap, but cortisol is a necessary stress hormone. But cortisol kind of preps those neurons, and then the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is a hormone, it's a growth hormone that wires those neurons together. So by engaging in physical activity, if we do it every day, if we are suffering from depression or anxiety, what we can do is we can rewire our brain to have a more positive response. So it changes our outlook, it changes how we feel. And there was a fantastic book written several years ago called Spark. It was written by a professor at Harvard University named Jonathan Rady, and he's a professor of neuroscience. And the idea was that exercise can not only enhance learning, but enhance mood disorders and help reverse those mood disorders. And one of the quotes that I loved from this book was that every time you exercise, it's like taking a little bit of Prozac and a little bit of Adderall. So every time you take that, you help regulate things like ADHD, and it helps regulate things like depression and anxiety. So you can literally rewire your brain, not just for performance, but for mental and physical wellness. But the important thing is to do it every day. So that comes to the last T in the FIT principle, which is type, which is mode of exercise. So one of the suggestions that I give most of my personal training clients, as well as my students, is pick an exercise you like to do. If it's something you'd like to do, you're going to do it. You're more likely to do it. And herein lies the problem, because most of us have been conditioned to think that exercise is painful or uncomfortable. You have to go to the gym, you got to spend all this money on fitness equipment, then you got to pay for the gym membership, and then you got to go in there and get on these strange machines which are foreign to most of us, and you have to put yourself in a really uncomfortable position. Well, that's not necessary. Our ancestors didn't do that, and our ancestors were not suffering from metabolic syndrome. Our ancestors were, of course, dying from disease, infectious disease, and they were also dying from accidents, like getting run over by trains and horses. But where we are today is that we are living a different type of a life. We're living, like I said, a more sedentary life, where we now have to graft exercise onto our regular day, whereas exercise, which was movement, was just part of our ancestors' day. So just moving, like I mentioned before, will suffice for many of us. Now, granted, if you are going to be in a competitive sport, or you're going to be training for something very specific, like bodybuilding, for instance, or a fitness competition, your training is going to be a little bit different. But find something you like. It might be gardening. It might be going for a walk out in the woods with your dogs. Could be, biking around the neighborhood, rollerblading, kayaking, you name it. It counts, and it accumulates throughout the day. So anything that gets your heart rate up, makes you exert yourself a little bit, pushes you outside of your comfort zone a little bit, that's a stressor that could lead to positive physiological adaptations. So how often do you need to train? Ideally every day. And it should be something that you enjoy doing, because then it doesn't seem like work at all. But if let's just say you just can't get out, I mean, you're just so busy, it's midterms or final exams, and if, let's say that you have family obligations on top of that, I mean, finding that time to exercise every day seems insurmountable in many cases. In that case, look for those little snacks, those little fitness snacks. Get up and move around and accumulate exercise throughout the day. There's an interesting phenomenon called the blue zones. I don't know if you've heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. So a gentleman named Dan Botner, he was he is a journalist for National Geographic, kind of stumbled upon these 5 areas in the world that he termed the blue zones. And these were areas where people lived to be 100 years old at much higher percentages than anywhere else in the world. These places are Loma Linda, California, let me see, Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. Let me think.
Mediterranean?
Sorry?
Mediterranean,
Yeah,
maybe?
yes, Sardinia in Italy. Oh boy, let me think, what was the other one? Okinawa, Japan.
Yes.
And the last one escapes me right now. But the common thread of these blue zones was this. Individuals moved to live. Of course, they had access to clean water, fresh fruits and vegetables, but they had a community. So they all had a sense of community. There was always some form of spirituality, in their environment. But one of the real factors that was so mind-blowing was nobody joined a gym. Nobody actually went and joined a fitness center and lifted heavy weights or went and trained for a marathon. They just moved to live. If you lived in Sardinia, a very mountainous area, and you're 90 years old and you need fish for dinner, you walked down hundreds of stairs to go to the fish market and then walked hundreds of stairs back up. If you're in, let's say you are in Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, same thing, mountainous area, beautiful area, but people walk. They walk to visit their neighbors. They walk to go to the market. They climb stairs continuously. They walk up hills to access their farms. So these areas, even though people didn't quote unquote exercise, they were getting physical activity throughout the day. And these individuals live healthy, vibrant lives well into their 90s, which I think we could all learn a lesson from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, because I can't remember, but what was the unique aspect of the California town?
In Loma Linda, California, it's an area. It's an area where there is a large number of Seventh-day Adventists.
Okay.
And Seventh-day Adventists, their diet typically is dictated as a vegetarian diet. Yeah.
Yes.
And so they ate very, very cleanly. They have a very strong sense of community, strong sense of spirituality, and again, it's a walkable town. So people get up, they walk around, and rather than depending on public transportation or driving their own cars, get out and move around on their own.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, sure thing.
Well, so this next question kind of hits home for me. My wife teases me frequently. She said, Donnie, when we dated in college, you had a really nice butt, but over the years you've lost it. It kind of rotated into the front. So we're going to talk about belly fat. For those that are curious, a little bit TMI for me. I know. Sorry about that, but it is true, unfortunately. Get in the bathroom every morning, and I always look at the gut, and it's like So for those of us that have that belly fat, what do you recommend? How can we get rid of it?
We could do an entire episode on this.
Okay, maybe we will.
Okay, we might need to.
Okay.
So belly fat is an interesting phenomenon. Basically, the technical term for that would be visceral fat. And so visceral fat, this is the fat that accumulates around the midsection. A lot of times we used to call it the middle age spread. We saw it happen, once you got out of college, got that 9 to 5, and spent the next 30 years, sitting in a cubicle somewhere with maybe, well, you had no physical activity at that point, unfortunately. But it's directly related to stress, and now, stress is stress is stress. Regardless of where the stress is, your body reacts in almost exactly the same way, through the fight or flight response, which is a good thing. The fight or flight response is why we're here, because our ancestors were able to outrun a saber-toothed tiger that was trying to eat them. So for a large part of our development and our ancestry, we were either running after something to eat it or running from something trying to eat us. So we had that fight or flight response, which dumps 2 main chemicals into our bloodstream. One of them is adrenaline, which is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Those hormones are related to increasing heart rate, increasing increasing the stroke volume or your blood pressure, so it pumps more blood throughout your body, increases visual acuity. You might, if you ever blew through a speed trap, going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, you felt it. Your heart rate goes up, you start breathing a little harder, and you start shaking a little bit. Yeah. You're shaking a little bit because that hormone is facilitating muscular contraction, so you can fight or flight from that threat. But then, you're sitting in your car, and so, hopefully you're not fighting or flighting in that case. But the other, yeah, let's hope not. Yeah, but the other hormone is cortisol. Now, cortisol's job is, it's actually pretty fascinating. Cortisol's main job is to make energy available for fight or flight. So it breaks down protein. So in a long-term situation, it could break down muscle tissue, but in a short-term situation, it's going to make glucose available for that fight or flight situation. But it also has another interesting effect, that it facilitates clotting. So, like, let's say that saber-toothed tiger does get a hold of you, you don't bleed out. Yeah. It'll allow you to survive that initial encounter. So, short-term stress is good. Short-term stress keeps us alive. It allows us to adapt to our environment and survive. Long-term stress, on the other hand, is where the problem lies, and particularly when we don't have an outlet for that stress. And that outlet is typically like physical activity. The whole point of the fight or flight reaction is for us to move, is to do something, to react to that stressor, that threat, if you will, that just came in our face. But what if that threat is your boss? Yelling at you, where's that report that I was demanding, or your professor, your professor is like, again, where's that report that I was expecting? If we aren't dealing with stress appropriately and it becomes chronic, it's the difference between eustress and distress. Eustress is a term that we use for positive stress. This is stress that allows us to adapt positively to our environment. It's what gets us up in the morning. It's what gets us motivated and allows us to do our job. Distress, on the other hand, is when we have a changing perspective on that. It's when it becomes chronic and it becomes detrimental. And in this case, what happens is we see things like high blood pressure, definitely. But that's typically long-term when that happens. That's when it becomes problematic. But the one that's insidious, the thing that we don't see, is the effects of cortisol over time. So cortisol over time will lead to a breakdown of protein, so we start losing muscle mass. And if we're not replacing it by stimulating the muscle mass by doing exercise, by moving, then it will gradually and progressively get worse and worse. But it breaks down the protein to liberate glucose, so we have that energy in a fight or flight situation. Our body doesn't differentiate. It doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and your professor. It just doesn't know. So you're getting the same response. So as this is happening, you're raising your blood glucose levels over time. Now, glucose is an interesting sugar. It is a sugar. Yeah. And sugar is, it is a fuel, but it's also pretty poisonous. It causes something called glycylation of our cells, and particularly of our DNA. So it can cause an inflammatory reaction, and we have this triple helix formation of our DNA, which are capped by these little caps that are called telomeres. And as we develop what are called reactive oxygen species, we also call them free radicals, they break down those telomeres and gradually and eventually cause the DNA to unravel and cause that cell to die, and eventually the tissue dies. So glucose has been positively associated with an inflammatory reaction that can cause that breakdown of our DNA, and that's what causes aging. Wow. That's what eventually, enough of it happens, that's what causes us to die, as our tissues die. Yeah. So glucose is a poison as well, but glucose as a sugar is actually two different sugars put together. And you probably heard of high fructose corn syrup, right? So what can happen is glucose can become fructose, and the fructose can actually, it'll build up and it can cause something called fatty liver disease. Our body doesn't know what to do with fructose, and so we're not going to metabolize it, we're going to store it, and it ends up getting converted into fat in our liver, and it causes a buildup in that, and that's one of the, it's referred to as NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and we're actually seeing it in children now. This is something we never saw in children before, but we're seeing this in children. So it's leading to things like liver failure. But it's also causing chronically elevated levels of glucose in the body, which causes a reaction with another organ, our pancreas, which causes us to push out too much insulin. As we push out too much insulin, and this is something that I think we need to measure more, is we get really stuck on measuring glucose. We don't measure insulin. It's not as easy to measure. But as glucose levels go up, insulin goes up. And the job of insulin is to bind to cell bodies to then, on the outside of the cell bodies, to then allow glucose to be absorbed by that cell for either the production of something called ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy that our cells thrive on, which I guess that's a positive thing in this case because we're using it for an energy source. So that's what insulin is going to do. It's going to bind to that receptor and allow us to absorb that. Now, every cell in your body has the ability to absorb this. But what ends up happening is the insulin receptors, in this case, if we're not active for our muscles, are going to become overwhelmed, almost oversaturated, and they're not going to become as reactive. They're not going to bind to the insulin like they should, and then we're going to start seeing insulin levels go up. Well, what also happens is we have insulin receptors in our fat cells. So our fat cells are designed to store energy. Now, subcutaneous fat, that's the fat underneath our skin, we can have a large amount of body fat in our subcutaneous fat and be just fine. We could be just fine. You could appear outwardly to be overweight, but actually be metabolically very, very healthy because you're actually storing that excess energy in your subcutaneous fat. That's not a bad thing. What's bad is what happens when our visceral fat starts storing that, because that tends to be directly related to this cortisol. So as we are chronically stressed, we have elevated cortisol levels due to stress, those fat cells in our belly start to get just overwhelmed, and they start to store more and more and more fat. Now, there are a lot of things that can go wrong when this happens, but overall, one of the biggest problems is that it causes a dramatic increase in inflammation. So inflammation tends to be the thing that's really what's killing us. So we see a highly inflammatory response occur when this occurs. Now, the main problem here is insulin, though. So the overload of glucose in our body, either through diet or through stress, they can both elevate our glucose levels, cause a dramatic increase in our insulin levels, and so we start storing it more and more, but we reach a point where we can't bind. The insulin receptors downregulate. They become less receptive. It's almost like, you ever have that roommate that's nagging you to do your dishes? Yeah, will you do your dishes? Are you going to do your dishes?
I was probably the nagger, but
yeah, well, you probably remember then your roommate probably didn't hear you anymore. You developed that selective hearing. Yeah, so your cells develop that same selective hearing. They become downregulated to the effects of insulin, so you're no longer able to bind to the insulin and no longer able to bring your blood sugar down. Now you've got type 2 diabetes because you have chronically elevated blood sugar and you are insulin resistant. You're making insulin. Your pancreas is fine, but you're unable to actually use the insulin. So we start seeing cellular death and eventually tissue death throughout the body. Everything from blood vessels causing peripheral vascular disease, and you get non-healing ulcers in that case in the long term. And then we start seeing things like amputations of your toes and your feet and your legs, or possibly your hands as well. You might get something like peripheral neuropathy. So the nerves in your fingers and your toes and your legs and your hands start to die. Blindness, because the blood vessels to your retina begin to die. So the kidneys start to fail because, again, the blood vessels going to your kidneys start to die as well. So ultimately, these negative effects of type 2 diabetes become the long-term, I won't say end product of this whole situation. But belly fat is one of the first things you see.
Right.
You'll see that increase in belly fat due to the increase in visceral fat. So, how to lose that? One of the most important things to do is stress management. Wow. Yeah, truly stress management. Wow. Whether that's developing a program and a way on your own to manage stress, because stress is inevitable. We're going to see it. But figuring out a way to turn that distress into eustress. I mean, sometimes hiring a counselor My wife's a counselor, so I have to plug that. Yes, hire a counselor who can then help you learn coping mechanisms to help deal with those stressors. I know personally, I mean, God knows I experience enough stress in my life. I mean, being a professor is not the least stressful job in the world. And of course, time management has always been a struggle for me, and that's created a lot of stress. And I found my coping mechanism is exercise. Yeah, just by getting out and getting on my mountain bike, hanging out with my dogs or my family, that is one of the most effective ways for me to bring my stress levels down. So I try to do that as much as possible. Other people might find something like meditation or reading or knitting or who knows? I mean, sky's the limit, whatever it is. If you can find something to help mitigate that stress, that's the first step you could take to help reduce the belly fat. From there, the next step, diet and exercise can contribute. Diet is definitely more important than exercise in this case, though. I would like to preface by saying that. There's a saying in exercise science, you can't outrun a bad diet. And it's very, very true. So we have to take a hard look at what it is that you're taking in. Cutting out the processed or the hyper-processed foods. You know, if it comes in a package, probably a bad choice. You know, we are probably one of the most overfed but nutrient deficient populations on Earth. We've removed all the nutrients from our food and just provided energy. So when we eat something that's hyper processed, basically like take flour for instance, like a cookie. You know, 100 years ago, the flour from a cookie probably had, you know, the outer part of the grain, the bran included in it, which would mitigate the glucose response when you ate that food. It was harder to digest, and therefore sugar was absorbed much, much more slowly into the bloodstream. A glycemic index in food is an indicator of how quickly blood sugar enters the bloodstream and what effect it will have on your insulin. So these processed foods, it's just like eating sugar. You may as well just be eating table sugar in this case, because it's going to have a similar response. So trying to eat whole foods is probably one of your best bets. It's going to have a lower glycemic index. You know, like the difference between an apple and apple juice. Apple juice is pure sugar. Okay, it's your blood sugar is going to skyrocket, therefore your insulin levels are going to skyrocket, causing that storage response. Whereas an apple, it's the same stuff, but it has the fiber associated with it. You see, because you're eating the actual whole apple. And the fiber is going to slow down the digestion, because in order for that sugar to get absorbed, it has to go from the stomach into the small intestine. And that fiber is going to slow it down. And by slowing it down, it's going to cause a very gradual increase in sugar, and therefore cause a very gradual increase in insulin. So over time, what you're going to see is that your insulin receptors are going to become more receptive. And therefore, that's what type 2 diabetes is insulin insensitivity. And what we're going to do is we're going to make your insulin receptors more receptive, and therefore the insulin that you do produce does its job. So by keeping your blood sugar at a moderate level over time, you never get hungry. So eating foods high in fiber, foods protein and fat as well. If you combine that with your meals, it's going to slow that digestion down, and it's going to allow these insulin receptors over time to become more sensitive, and you're not going to have those insulin spikes that cause massive absorption in these cells, particularly the belly fat. And then, so over time, you start seeing a gradual decrease. So no quick fix, unfortunately. It is definitely lifestyle change that's going to be required, but these are very manageable things.
And reversible.
Oh, 100% reversible. Yeah, you could absolutely reverse this. As a matter of fact, that's the most frustrating thing for me, is that type 2 diabetes really shouldn't exist. This is something that we can treat with lifestyle change. But again, we got to make that commitment to do that. We have to make the commitment to move. We got to make the commitment to eat healthy, let's be frank, inconvenient foods. The foods are inconvenient. You actually have to learn to cook and make those choices. A good rule to follow, shop on the outside of the grocery store, around the periphery. The processed foods tend to be in the middle aisles, easy to reach, because grocery stores want to separate you from your money, and they know that's the easiest way to do that. If you shop around the periphery, that's where the healthiest foods tend to be, and that's where the whole foods tend to be. Learn to cook. You know, it's actually fun. You know, it's fun to create something that you actually get to eat. You know, that's a good thing to do, and it's a good activity for bonding with your family as well. It's a great thing to pass on to your kids as well, as the ability to cook. And as far as exercise goes, do something that you enjoy. Now, taking a step back, so getting the gut is one thing. Losing the butt, that's an entirely different thing that we could talk about.
I don't have that problem, but
Okay, yeah.
That's gone.
Okay.
Created the problem for the gut.
Well, actually, can we address that?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
that's also a phenomenon that is just recently being understood. There's this condition that we've developed over time because of our sedentary lifestyle called upper and lower cross syndrome. And I see it every day. This is actually the bread and butter of physical therapists and of chiropractors right now. We have a term for it now. For upper cross syndrome, we call it tech neck.
Okay.
We see it every day. Everyone with their shoulders forward, their elbows flexed, their head forward as they are straining to see their screens. They're either on a computer or on your phone for hours and hours every day. Well, what happens here is interesting. Now, I'm just going to address the upper body. We're going to get to the butt here in a second. But we're talking about the upper body. As your arms come across like this, over time, the muscles, the frontal muscles, the pectoralis major, the pectoralis minor, the biceps brachii here are chronically contracting. Well, there's a phenomenon called reciprocal inhibition. And what reciprocal inhibition is when one muscle is firing, and we call that the agonist, the antagonist must relax. So an example of that is if you want to straighten your knee, you're going to fire your quadriceps. Your hamstrings have to relax. If you want to contract your biceps, your triceps has to relax. It happens at the spinal cord level. You don't think about it, it happens automatically. Well, let's say you're on your phone for, 16 hours a day?
Yeah.
Well, that's assuming you're sleeping for 8 hours. Okay, let's be more realistic. You're on your phone for 18 hours a day, or you're on a computer, but you're in front of a screen.
Yeah.
Your shoulders are forward,
Yeah.
probably elevated because you're stressed. This is part of the stress response. Your your shoulders are internally rotated, and so your pectoralis major, pectoralis minor are contracting, causing your shoulders to elevate and roll forward. That means the muscles in your upper back have to relax. If a muscle relaxes long enough, it will begin to atrophy. So we lose the muscle mass in our upper back, and we end up gaining spasticity in the muscles in the front. Same thing happens here in the neck. Again, part of the fight or flight reaction, interestingly, if you've ever seen a possum get scared, it curls into a ball. Well, humans do the same thing.
Wow.
And we call that the fright reaction. That's the part we don't usually refer to in the fight or flight reaction. So we get the fright reaction, which causes these muscles to contract. The muscles here in the front, called the sternocleidomastoids, they fire, pulling your head down and forward. We do this to protect the soft, squishy parts so that saber-toothed tiger that we were talking about earlier doesn't kill us. They could chew on our back all day and we can survive. They eat the stuff here, we die. Right. So these muscles will contract with stress as well. So we combine stress and being in front of a screen for hours every day, and we get spastic muscles in the front, weakened muscles in the back. That ends up leading to chronic shoulder problems because now the space where the tendons of the rotator cuff come out of the shoulder gets compressed, and we have what we call subacromial impingement syndrome. So things like reaching overhead to grab something out of the top cabinet become difficult and become painful. We end up with chronic tendonitis or bursitis in the shoulder. In the neck, because our head is forward, well, our head should be stacked right on top of our spine, but now these muscles are pulling our head forward, and we have this forward head posture where our cervical vertebrae straighten out. And when that happens, these muscles in the back of our head and the back of our neck are working like mad to keep that 10-pound bowling ball of a head on top of those 7 Jenga blocks on our cervical spine. So we're having a very, very difficult time just trying to hold this in place. So these muscles go into spasticity, just attempting to keep our head in place. Well, long term, that causes degenerative changes to the discs in our neck, causes narrowing of the space between our vertebrae, pinching the nerves going out. Now we get numbness and tingling down into our arms, very often misdiagnosed as carpal tunnel syndrome. Yeah, and so we see this whole cacophony of problems being caused because of that posture. That's in the upper body. Look what we're doing right now. We're sitting. Yeah. And how much do we sit during the day? I mean, once you enter kindergarten, what was the old saying? We spend the first 5 years teaching our kids to walk and talk, and the next 13 years telling them to sit down and shut up. Yeah, so we end up, we're sitting, and well, then you graduate from high school, you go to college, and we put you in a classroom, and we have you sit for hours upon hours. And then, you graduate from college and hopefully you get a job. And most of us get jobs where we then sit. We sit in a car, we commute, we walk a little bit to the elevator to get to our office, where we then spend the next 8 hours sitting in a cubicle. And then we get up, get back in our car, sit for another couple of hours in traffic, get home, sit for, well, God knows how long, until dinner time. Then we get up, eat dinner, then we go back to the couch, sit down, and then go to bed, rinse, repeat. Do that for the next 30 plus years. Yeah. And ultimately what happens then is, because of this position, our hip flexors become shortened. Our hip flexors are firing. You could probably, if you push on your hip flexors, you could feel that they're actually tight right now. Yeah. So they're firing. Well, we end up with a reciprocal inhibition in our lower body as well. It's because our hip flexors are firing, our hip extensors, which are our glutes, our butt, it turns off. So we actually have a term for that now. We call it gluteal amnesia.
Wow.
Yeah. The glutes turn off because, they can fire, they just forgot how to. You need to turn them back on again. Okay. So, but it's not just the glutes, it's also the torso, the core muscles. So we're in this posture, this forward flex posture. What ends up happening is our pelvis changes position. Our hip flexors are tight, our pelvis tilts forward. When they tilt forward, our lower back becomes spastic because those muscles shorten. Now we have spastic, tight lower back muscles. And at the same time, our abdomen, since our pelvis tilts forward, our abdomen, since these muscles in the back are firing, these muscles turn off. So we end up with reciprocal inhibition of the core muscles, the six-pack muscles, the rectus abdominis and the transverse abdominis, the muscles in the front, they get turned off because of that tilting of the pelvis. So we end up in a real conundrum here because we are sitting and we're sedentary. The solution to this, again, move. Yeah. Just taking the stairs, just standing. Standing desks do have some benefit, but they're not a panacea. They're not going to fix everything. So engaging in an exercise program that allows you to sit and stand, walking, climbing stairs, walking up hills, anything like that will engage the glutes becomes almost a requisite movement in order to reverse that reciprocal inhibition. So it is reversible there as well. So we can eliminate a large amount of the back pain. Here's an interesting stat for you. 90% of the American population will seek medical help for back pain at some point in their life. 90%. And a large amount of that is directly associated with sitting. So just a couple of years ago, NIH put out a statement that said sitting is the new smoking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So sitting is very, very problematic. But I don't see any change in that anytime soon, unfortunately. Just the lifestyle that we've adopted. So we have to make a very cognizant effort, purposeful effort, if you will, to get out and move. Yeah.
Well, that was a great answer. Very comprehensive. I was just sitting here thinking, folks that are listening, you don't get that when you go to the doctor's office. And John, thank you so much, because that was, just super valuable to me individually, and I'm sure to many of our listening audience. So thank you for bringing that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but man, I would love to bring you back for a part 2 and maybe even part 3, because
absolutely,
this is super fascinating, and I've learned so much already, and I can't wait to get back together with you so that we can kind of pound out some other information. Would you be willing to come back?
100%. I'm here.
All right. I appreciate that. Well, listen, thanks for tuning in today. Okay. And, if you have any questions, about today's content, John, how could they get a hold of you?
You could shoot me an email at jwright@frostburg.edu. That's jwright, W-R-I-G-H-T, @frostburg.edu. You could attempt to call my office, but I honestly don't know the last time I answered my office phone. So email is definitely the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, that's great. Well, again, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Great
my information. Look forward to having you come back.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing me in.
Well, again, thank you for joining us for another PAWSCAST episode. I hope that you continue to make those healthy choices. And remember, healthy choices equal healthy lives. Thanks, and we'll see you later.
Thank you for being a part of our PAWSCAST. This health and wellness podcast is brought to you by the Prevention Center and Peer Education Network at Frostburg State University. If you would like more information about our programs, Visit us in Pullen Hall, room 109, or call us at 301-687-4761. Or you can always send us an email at safeoffice@frostburg.edu. Remember to watch our other episodes and stay tuned throughout the semester. Thank you!